David Cage has always made games that fascinates me. My fascination on things doesn't necessarily have to be good. David Cage's games have revolutionized modern adventure games, as in not really adventure and more of a narrative-driven linear experience, with little to no gameplay other than quick-time events and puddling around the area and expecting things to change. Playing a David Cage game relies so much on the decisions that you make throughout the game and how your decisions impact the story in some ways, which can be minor or it can also be major depending on the choices that you make. His style of games have influenced a lot of adventure games to date, especially every game made by Telltale Games ever. Considering how The Walking Dead Season 1 is one of my favorite games of all time and Telltale hasn't produced anything that gets remotely close to that level of emotional drama, I'm gonna have to roll back to David Cage, and conveniently he just released a game called Detroit Become Human. A game that is sold for $40 in my area, and just like any other games from David Cage, a narrative-driven adventure game whose story is dependent on the player choice. Now, some people compared this method of video game storytelling by saying that it's less of a video game and more of a visual novel with a AAA budget, and that's a sentiment that I can certainly share, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people won't buy this game. You can have all the talk about how you're going to merely watch someone else stream this game or look at the complete cutscenes on YouTube, but that cannot deny the fact that you're going to buy this game anyway. At least the people in the UK will buy it anyway. They buy it so much to the point where it tops the charts on the PS4 sales. Just because it's an overly glorified visual novel doesn't mean that people won't buy it. But that's not necessarily the argument. The argument, or more accurately the question, is why should I buy a game whose experience I can totally replicate by just watching them on YouTube? Personally, I buy the game because it looks interesting, and that's the sort of game I want to experience myself. Experiencing the games on YouTube just isn't as satisfying. However, that doesn't mean that this rule applies to every game, because there are games that I would just prefer to watch someone else play on YouTube, like horror games, because I'm a massive pussy. And Detroit certainly grabbed my attention. $40 out of my wallet is out, and for me, $40 is totally the right price. Shame to all of my other Western viewers who have to wait for this game to go on sale, because I think $60 for this game is just pushing it. For the record, I beat this game 3 times already, 2 of which are the ultra good endings, and every time I beat it, I always get a different experience and unlock new routes that I didn't catch on in my other playthroughs. So I think the game is certainly worth my $40 purchase. But I think we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about the story of this game. The year is around 2038. It's a year where androids are living among human beings and used as slaves for the humans. You are playing as 3 playable androids with different stories each. The first one that you play is Connor, a special agent or detective android of some sort whose job is to hunt rebelling androids called deviants. The second one is Kara, a maid android bought by an abusive father of a child. And the final one is Marcus, an android who is under the tutelage of an aging artist that teaches him the values of humanity. And by that I mean shoving the game's moral message down your throat. I don't know where to begin when I talk about this game, so let's just get to the most basic parts that you want to know the most. Is this game good? Well, unfortunately, explaining why this game is good requires a little bit more context. How about we talk about the things that the game is really good at first? Thanks to the game using a flowchart system, it is significantly more organized than any other David Cage games. Not only that, but through the flowchart system, you can see the things that you accomplish and the many things that you miss as you play through the game. And just by seeing the flowcharts given, there are so many routes and possibilities that it is impossible to experience them all just through 2 or 3 playthroughs. Finding all of the possible routes is gonna be quite interesting. And thanks to the game being a lot more organized on its storytelling, the game's story ends up being significantly more grounded than any other David Cage games to date. This is perhaps the tamest work that David Cage has ever done. Unlike Heavy Rain, where there are so many things to just make you go, "Oh, David Cage, you naughty weirdo," this one has significantly less of that. If we're gonna go back to the visual novel comparison, it's almost like if the previous games that he made are hentais, and now he's forced to make an anime adaptation that is good enough to be released for the public, or a version to be released on Steam. And thanks to the game being a lot more grounded, there are significantly less chase sequences and action QTEs. The ones there are a lot less bombastic or jarringly out of tone as Heavy Rain or Beyond Two Souls. There are 2 difficulty settings on this one, and the only difference as far as I observe between the casual and experience is that there are a lot more button variations that you need to press during action QTEs. Not a big deal, but I'm not playing this game for Guitar Hero lessons. I'm in it for the story, and the 2 difficulty choices seems a bit arbitrary than anything. The gameplay design overall is pretty damn great. The game expands upon the mechanics of other David Cage games. You're not just gonna pick decisions that impact the story, but you're also going to pick decisions that will impact the relationship between you and certain characters in the game. Your relationship with these characters will eventually eventually impact the story, and the fate of these respective characters are going to be determined by your relationships and your decisions with them. I also really love that the decisions that you pick on the game will determine what kind of character arc that you want for those characters. You can either be obedient or a deviant. You can approach things peacefully or violently. You can either be a criminal or not a criminal. The game will absolutely remember the decisions that you pick on the chapters, and some of these decisions will make a great impact upon the story. So the game gets a lot of the ingredients right. It has great gameplay design, great visual design, the story is a lot more grounded and less bombastic, there aren't too many jarring tone shifts in like the previous David Cage games, every playthrough will grant you a different experience. So the question right now is the sort of thing that will definitely turn people off, and there are certainly tons and tons and tons of them. For one, despite the game having solid design in both the gameplay and the visual department, the story design is unfortunately not as great. The first major problem of the story is that it is some of the most cookie-cutter, lazy, generic storyline about slavery and rebellion. I have never seen such astonishingly lazy allegory for discrimination and slavery since Solo: A Star Wars Story. The reason why it's so lazy is because it really doesn't do anything to differentiate itself from many other plots about robots regaining free will and rebelling against their masters. Remember the movie I, Robot? Yeah, this game is pretty much that. With the story being a lot more grounded than any other David Cage games, it can also result in the game being rather tedious and boring. Thanks to the game being a lot more grounded, there are good chances that you're going to be bored too, because there isn't really anything special about the game's plot. It does nothing new at all to the basic formula. If you know that the next chapter of the game is another lazy allegory for slavery and racism, then what else is the motivation for me to play other than shaping the character arcs of my 3 characters? And speaking of characters, despite the game having a somewhat realistic setting, the game has some of the most downright cartoonish mini antagonists out there. Some of them are straight up junkies, like the abusive father Todd and the junkie son Leo, but some of them are assholes for no reason whatsoever. There's a chapter in this game which is a straight up Toy Story ripoff. I am not even kidding with that one. I have no idea why this chapter is in there other than to have another character Lufer for Kara's journey, who is so barely involved in the plot and have no narrative purpose, he might as well not exist. At least the journey of all the characters are great. Well, at least Connor and Marcus's story are great because at least you have full control of the decisions that they have and the characters that they will become. Kara's story, on the other hand, she doesn't suffer any sort of character arc. In fact, it's safe to say that she doesn't have any character at all. The game thinks that an android caring about the safety of a child is going to blow my mind, but it doesn't. Her personality goes nowhere beyond she has compassion, which is something that every android in the game can easily outmatch in 2 minutes and still have a better story than hers. What's quite astonishing about Kara's route is that despite one of her goals being to make good relationship with Alice, Alice herself doesn't really have any character beyond she's just a helpless child. How are you going to make me relate and sympathize with a character that has no personality other than she's a child? At least give her some quirks or traits that I can relate to other than the standard little girl template. In The Walking Dead, for example, Clementine has a personality. She has her quirks, she has her own issues to deal with. She can also be really useful for other characters. Her personality is what strengthens your motivation to save her, which is unfortunately not happening with Alice. And if you're going to respond to this by talking about that really stupid and useless twist near the end, that still doesn't change the fact that her personality is about as interesting as a piece of bread, which renders our motivation in bringing her happiness more and more pointless. The reason why Marcus and Connor's routes are interesting is because all of the routes have side characters that have their own issues, complexities, personalities, and especially conflicts. Their relationships with these characters are the ones that build Marcus and Connor's character. Kara's relationship with Alice is astonishingly dull, which is not helped by the fact that both characters have zero personality. That, and unlike Connor and Marcus, where you can control and shape their character arcs to the point where you can even create different personalities and unique traits for each, there are no moments in the game where you can shape Kara's personality, or at least shape her to the point where she has something unique to offer. The world building can also really get confusing at times. So the game takes place in the future where androids take over the jobs from other humans because they are evidently more efficient and provides less risk for the humans. Okay, so what do the humans actually do? I mean, it's the question that the game itself asks, but if the humans are so inefficient to begin with, then how can middle-class people earn money? How can they buy androids with a price range from $400 to $7,000? What is the unemployment rate for humans and the employment rate for androids? How efficient are the androids at their job? What are the limits of the jobs that androids can do? I can safely say for certain that there are so many tasks that androids or AIs in general are incapable of doing. There are tasks that human touch will be proven more reliable than an AI one. Babysitting, for example. I wouldn't trust an android to babysit, especially when they are capable of being exploited by the children. Also, like the mother of the intro of this game, I wouldn't trust an android for a negotiation mission, although that mission is surprisingly pretty damn easy, so I would trust them to clean the house and commit repairs, but I wouldn't trust them to parent my children. My overall point is, there seems to be no limit on what the androids are capable of. While shaping the characters and their personality are great and all, it's unfortunately not helped by the game's dialogue options, which only have one word that is supposed to represent what it says. This can get really confusing and a lot of times misleading. One of the biggest problems with the game is the camera and the tank controls, which are absolutely awful. So you can essentially make a traditional third-person camera by holding the R2 button, but the game will occasionally switch back to a fixed perspective. With the tank controls, I am basically playing a Resident Evil game, and pressing the R1 button, which will change the perspective manually, really doesn't help that much. In the end, Detroit Become Human is actually slightly better than I expected. It gives me quite a lot of things that surprised me from David Cage, and I can confidently say that this is among his best works. But that's not saying much because David Cage's works, at least recently, aren't exactly too great to begin with. The game has tons and tons of problems. It's a solid and enjoyable experience muddled with unfortunately generic, predictable, and lazy story that could have been done so much better. It is a lot more grounded and organized than any other David Cage games, but a grounded and organized generic story is still a generic story. Still, I cannot deny the fact that I have tons of fun playing this game. I have a great experience with it, both on my streams and off streams. I like the characters, at least some of them. I like that I can give them personalities and arcs, again, at least some of them. The game is visually stunning, the gameplay design is something that is going to warrant a lot of replays, and for my purchase of this game of $40 thanks to regional pricing, I would say that it is absolutely worth that price. So if the game is on sale for less than that, it would absolutely be a great value. But at the current state of it being $60 on the West, I don't blame you if you're just gonna watch it on YouTube anyway.